English speaking. English speaking was never loud in Rahim's life. It lived quietly inside him, hidden behind thoughts he never shared and sentences he never finished. Tamdada. Every day, he heard English around him, on screens, in offices, in conversations he wished to join, but fear always stood between his mind and his mouth. Months. He understood many words, yet when it was time to speak, his voice felt heavy and slow. One morning, as Rahim walked alone on an empty street, Lemdiance, he spoke a simple sentence out loud for the first time. Today, I will try. The words sounded strange, but they were real. That moment did not change the world, Balland, but it changed something inside him. He began speaking to the air, to the road, to his own reflection, practicing English speaking in small, honest ways. Oh, mistakes followed him, but so did courage. And without knowing it, Rahim had taken the first step in a long journey where English would no longer be a fear, either but a voice he could finally call his own. First attempts. Rahim did not tell anyone about the sentence. He spoke on the empty street. It felt too small to share, like a secret seed planted in quiet soil. I go. Yet the next morning when he woke up, the words returned to him. While making tea, he spoke again, softly. I am making tea. His voice sounded unsure, banned, but it did not disappear. He repeated the sentence once more, slower this time, listening to himself as if he were learning his own name. The kitchen did not laugh at him. Wonkums, the walls did not judge him. That silence gave him courage. On his way to work, Rahim began to notice how many chances he had to practice English speaking. Leaned. He described simple things in his mind and sometimes out loud: the blue sky, the busy road, the noise of cars, the tired faces around him. He used easy words, words he already knew. Konyo. And he did not try to sound smart. He only tried to be clear. When a sentence broke in the middle, he did not stop. He finished it the best way he could, even if it sounded wrong. MD at work. English waited for him like a test he could not avoid. Emails, short meetings, greetings in the hallway. Normally, Rahim stayed quiet, nodding and smiling. Hoping no one would ask him to speak. That day, when a colleague said, "Good morning," Rahim felt his heart beat faster. He wanted to answer in his own language, the safe one, Yauk. But instead he said, "Good morning. How are you?" The sentence was simple, but his hands shook when the colleague smiled and replied. Rahim felt something warm move through him. It was not pride. It was relief. Later that day, Rahim made mistakes. Many mistakes. He used the wrong tense. he forgot words he knew at home. Once, he stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence and felt his face grow hot. But something was different now. Blonde. The mistakes did not feel like walls. They felt like signs on a road, showing him where to go next. He wrote new words in a small notebook and practiced them quietly during breaks. Kai. He spoke them slowly without rushing, letting each sound settle. That evening, Raheem stood in front of the mirror again. He talked about his day in English. Manda. From the morning tea to the small conversation at work. Sometimes he laughed at himself. Sometimes he felt tired. But he did not quit. Leaned. He remembered something he once heard, that language grows when it is used, not when it is hidden. English speaking was no longer a dream he waited for. Ike. I know. It was an action he chose, one sentence at a time. Before sleeping, Raheem whispered, I spoke today. The sentence was short, but it carried weight. Mummed. He knew the journey would be long, filled with fear and effort, but for the first time, English did not feel like an enemy. It felt like a path, and he had finally started walking on it. Small wins. Raheem began to notice changes so small that he almost missed them. His mornings felt less heavy, and his thoughts started forming in English without effort. While brushing his teeth or tying his shoes, simple sentences came naturally, and he no longer needed to force them. English speaking was slowly becoming part of his routine. Kuno, like breathing or walking, something quiet but constant. He still felt nervous, but the fear no longer stopped him from trying. One afternoon, Kyo Rahim ordered tea in English at a small cafe near his office. His voice was soft, and the sentence was not perfect, but the server understood him. Edie. That moment stayed with him longer than he expected. It was a small win, invisible to others, yet powerful inside him. He realized that communication mattered more than correctness. Being understood gave him confidence that no textbook ever had. At work, Raheem started joining short conversations. He shared simple ideas in meetings. Sometimes only one sentence, sometimes two. When others listened, he felt seen. When they corrected him kindly, he learned. He stopped apologizing for his English and started focusing on his message. Planned each day, his notebook filled with fewer new words and more practiced ones. Words that now felt familiar and friendly. There were still difficult moments. Q. Some days, Raheem felt tired and slow. Some sentences refused to come out. But he reminded himself that progress was not a straight line. On those days, he spoke anyway, even if his voice was quiet. Mensa. He learned that courage was not loud confidence, but steady effort. Uncle? One evening, as Raheem walked home under the dim streetlights, he spoke freely about his day. his hopes and his worries. The words flowed, not fast, but honest. He smiled to himself, realizing that English speaking was no longer just practice. It was becoming his voice, shaped by patience, mistakes, and many small wins that quietly changed his life. June falling again. Just when Rahim began to feel steady, doubt returned without warning. One busy week at work, everything moved faster than he expected. Damda. Conversations were longer, meetings louder, and English felt heavy again on his tongue. He missed jokes, misunderstood instructions, and once answered a question incorrectly in front of others. Memda. No one was unkind, but Rahim felt the old fear rise inside him, whispering that his confidence had been false and temporary. That night, Rahim did not stand in front of the mirror. Land. He stayed quiet, replaying the moments in his mind, each mistake growing larger than it truly was. He compared himself to others who spoke English easily, smoothly, without pauses. Pauses. Co. For the first time in weeks, he thought about giving up, about returning to silence where he felt safe. English speaking suddenly seemed like a mountain too high to climb. The next day was harder. His voice shook again. Words escaped him. He spoke less and listened more, feeling disappointed in himself. Jammed. But during lunch, Rahim opened his notebook and saw the old pages filled with earlier mistakes he had already overcome. He remembered how far he had come, Kino, how silence once controlled him completely. That memory slowed his thoughts and softened his fear. That evening, Rahim forced himself to speak, even though he did not want to. Baned, he spoke slowly, simply, without judging each sentence. He talked about failure, about fear, about being tired. Speaking honestly helped him breathe again. He realized that falling back did not mean failing. It meant learning. Before sleep, Rahim understood something important. Confidence was not permanent. It needed care, patience, and forgiveness. English speaking was still his path, even on days when it felt difficult. And though he had fallen again, he also knew how to stand back up. One sentence at a time. Echo, voice found. Something shifted inside Rahim after the difficult days passed. He stopped fighting English and began accepting it as it was. Imperfect and unfinished, you know? Instead of trying to sound fluent, he focused on being clear. Instead of fearing mistakes, he allowed them to exist. This change was quiet, but it was powerful. Zlemde English speaking no longer felt like a test he had to pass. It felt like a tool he could use. Rahim started listening more carefully to how people spoke, not copying them, but learning their rhythm. Land. He noticed that even fluent speakers paused, searched for words, and corrected themselves. This realization made him feel human, not broken. Mommed. He practiced speaking slowly, letting his thoughts settle before his words followed. With each day, his voice grew steadier. One afternoon, Keo Rahim was asked to explain a small idea during a meeting. In the past, he would have avoided this moment. This time, he took a breath and spoke. Kyle. His sentences were simple, but they were his. He finished without stopping, without apologizing. When the meeting ended, someone thanked him for the clear explanation. That sentence stayed with him for hours. Outside of work, Rahim began using English in new places. He spoke with strangers, watched shows without fear, and even joked in simple ways. The language no longer lived only in practice time. Langed. It lived in his daily life. English speaking had found its place in him. That night, standing under the quiet sky, Rahim spoke freely about his future. The words came naturally, not fast, but confident. Bamdia. For the first time, he felt that English was not something he was chasing. It was something he had found, and his voice, shaped by patience and courage, was finally his own. Sharon the voice. After finding his voice, Rahim noticed a new feeling growing inside him, the desire to share what he had learned. He began to see others around him who stayed silent the way he once did, listening carefully, but never speaking. Their quiet faces reminded him of his past. Instead of judging, he understood them. English speaking had taught him patience, not only with himself, but with others too. One day, a junior colleague asked Rahim how he had improved his English. The question surprised him. Rahim smiled and answered honestly. He spoke about daily practice, simple sentences, and accepting mistakes. He did not sound like a teacher. He sounded like a traveler sharing the map of a road he had already walked. The colleague listened closely, and Rahim felt something new, pride mixed with responsibility. Slowly, Rahim began helping more people. He practiced short conversations during breaks, corrected gently, and encouraged often. He reminded them that fear is part of learning, not a sign of weakness. Through these small moments, Rahim realized that English speaking had changed his role. He was no longer only a learner. He was becoming a guide. At home, Rahim reflected on how far he had come. English was no longer just his personal victory. It had become a bridge he could offer to others. Speaking the language now carried meaning beyond confidence. It carried connection. That night, Rahim spoke one final sentence before sleep. My voice can help others. The words felt true. English speaking had given him freedom, and now it gave him purpose.